Hello, everybody. It's James here, WSI. My next guest is a two-time former WWF Intercontinental Champion when that title belt meant the absolute most. He's a two-time WWF Tag Team Champion when that belt meant the absolute most. And he's also a WWE Hall of Famer as well. It is, of course, Tito Santana. How the devil are you?
Doing pretty good, James. Thank you for having me on.
And thank you for waking up this early.
You're welcome. We're up.
You were saying to me just beforehand that you wake up at 5:30 every morning. It's like, man, like an air raid siren couldn't wake me up at 5:30 in the morning, but you do it every day.
Yeah. It's a. I guess we're creatures of habit.
Ah, dearie. When did you? This is apropos of nothing, but when did you used to wake up generally when you were on the road with the WWF in the heyday of most of the traveling? Would you wake up late? Would you wake up very early to go to the next town?
Usually, we would wake up pretty early because we're flying quite a bit, and they'd put us on the first flight to make sure that we'd make it to the next town. Or Yeah, I remember waking up pretty early. Most of the time. We had because we trained. I mean, everybody. We'd go to the gym early in the morning. We'd get up and have breakfast and go to the gym, and our day would begin. Pretty early.
When you were in a couple of the European tours, because I never got to go. I'm just a bit too young for the original European tours that the WWF would do. But was there always like that, like a panic-stricken point at one point when you thought you might miss the bus to go to the next town? And who was always latest?
Uh, well, Bret Hart always barely making it. He was Greg Valentine was always barely making it. I have always been I guess from playing American football in college. Our head coach had a rule, like if they had a meeting at 10 o'clock, they called it. His name was Mayfield. His Gene Mayfield time was always 15 minutes early, so we everybody had to be in the room when the head coach walked in, and it just got embedded into my brain, and I just like to be, I like to be early, and I hate when somebody is late if I'm waiting for them.
Do you, because obviously, I mean, you're a very punctual man, and who do you know, apart from like Brett and Greg maybe, who was fined the most for turning up late to a show? Do you know?
Uh, I don't really remember. Uh, I don't know if you remember the name Mike Sharp.
Yes, I'm Mike Sharp, yeah.
Yeah, he was strategically late pretty much all the time. And I don't know if you ever heard he would take the longest showers. He got locked into the Boston Coliseum one time because he was still taking a shower and they closed the doors, and I think they let some dogs out, and they were chasing him. But other than Mike Sharp, I don't remember. I know that I never got fined for for missing a show or being late.
Oh, you were already in the locker room, of course, so you wouldn't know who turned up last.
Right.
I'll tell you what then, we're going to go through a good old career sort of from beginning to end. I'm going to have to pick and choose the questions because I'm, like you always being early for something, I always over-prepare for stuff as well. Because if you're not over-prepared, you're under-prepared. So I've got so many questions, and we'll get to some of the best ones, and hopefully a few you don't get asked too often. But one that you probably get asked a lot is Dusty Rhodes, Terry Funk, Ted DiBiase, Dory Funk Jr., Tully Blanchard, Stan Hansen, Bruiser Brody, Manny Fernandez, Bobby Duncan, and yourself. How did you all end up in the same college, and why was it such a wrestling hotbed of talent?
I don't know, and I don't know if you knew that Barry Windham was also at West Texas State for a couple of years.
I completely forgot to write him down.
Yeah, he as a matter of fact, we're made the appearance here. We're making the appearance here today. He was. I got to see him yesterday, and he was really nice to see him. Uh, I was playing football at West Texas State, and that's how I met me and Tully Blanchard were together, and the $1 Million Man, Ted DiBiase, in the same team. And they were, I mean, so many really, really good wrestlers that came out of one area. It's I just saw Sten Hansen a couple of weeks ago. We had an appearance, and we're all starting to get up there in age. It's kind of sad. I understand Terry Funk is not doing that well, physically. So we're getting up in age.
Well, I was just looking, actually. I mean, for the most part, everyone's still going as well, so out of that group. But Tully Blanchard in particular, I believe that he recruited you. Was he trying to recruit everybody on the football team, or what did he see in you that you thought you'd be a good wrestler?
No, he wasn't. He never really talked about wrestling. He just came up to me one time, and I think we were having a beer, and he says, because his father was a promoter in San Antonio, and he says, my dad thinks that you could have a big career in professional wrestling. At the time, I didn't even acknowledge it. I wasn't interested. I wasn't a wrestling fan. I never watched wrestling. I didn't know anything about wrestling. So finally, my senior year, his father, Joe Blanchard, made a trip with us, and he sat next to me on the plane, and he starts telling me that I could be making $80,000 a year. He says you could have a very good career. He says you could be making $80,000 a year, and this was in 1975. And I said, God, $80,000. I signed with the Kansas City Chiefs. I think for $18,000 a year to play football, and I found out how tough that was to make a living, and I started thinking $80,000. So when I got cut from the Kansas City Chiefs, I went to Canada and played for the BC Lions. I came back and I told Tully, I said, Tully, I want to play one more year because I was making when I went to the BC Lions, I signed for $20,000, and then the next year $22,000, and like a 2,000 increments, and I kept thinking 80,000, and I didn't understand wrestling. I didn't understand the business. In football, you would sign a contract, and that's how you would get paid. I thought that I was going to negotiate with somebody for a contract, and little did I know that. So I told Tully, I said, I want to play one more year with the BC Lions and come back, and I want to start training, because he was going to graduate, and we started together. But when I first started training, and there was no money coming in, and I was training, for weeks, and nothing coming in, and then I started making shows, and some of the shows I make less money, than what I spent. I said, what happened to the $80,000? So I was in Florida, and Terry Funk was the world champion, and he came into Tampa, and he called me into the locker room. And he says, how you liking it, my boy? And I said, well, I'm liking it. I said, but the money's just not there. I was having to pay for my own apartment and stuff in Tampa. And I said, I think what I'm going to do, I said, I'm going to, in February, I'm going to stop training and just go home and start getting ready for my football season. And he said, well, don't do anything. Let me talk to Eddie Graham. And he went and talked to Eddie Graham, and like the following day, they called me into the office, and they started making, giving me some bookings, right? I could survive. And then before you know it, I'm booked in Atlanta, Georgia. They changed my name from Merced Solis to Richard Blood, which was Ricky Steamboat's real name. And I was on my way after that.
I just did a bit of Googling, so I think $80,000 in 1975 is the equivalent of around $450,000 today. So they were spinning you some pretty big numbers back then.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, teachers were in Texas. The annual salary for a teacher in Texas was $6,600. So $1,800 is pretty good.
Mm. Well, 80,000. Yeah, I'm trying to think what's that
I
in.
mean, 18,000.
Yeah.
18,000 was pretty good. Yeah.
With this is just a quick question actually, but it's not the first person I've heard someone say Joe Blanchard saw them and then got them into the business or suggested they get into the business, but then they don't work for Joe. They end up going to Florida. So why did you end up going to Florida instead of working for Joe?
Well, I think Joe wanted to introduce me into Texas when I got uh, ready to go and introduce me as a complete product to use me on top. That's my line of thinking.
Hmm.
Because the only thing I did for Joe Blanchard, I worked out a little bit there with him and Tully, and then I refereed 2 or 3 matches, and then Tully and I went together so I could get trained. I guess he wanted me to get trained and get some experience, and then come back uh, and work for him.
With training in Florida, that must mean that you trained under Hiro Matsuda.
Yeah,
How did that work
yeah.
out for you then? I take it you didn't get the old broken ankle in 2 minutes kind of treatment.
No, I think the fact that I had pretty good people that uh, brought me into the business. Uh, he and I mean, I was an athlete, and I had a pretty good attitude. I was not conceited. I didn't know anything about wrestling, and I went in with the attitude, and I'm willing to work hard, and I just want to learn. And uh, me and Barry Orton were breaking in at the same time. Barry Orton, his father would come in and train him, and Bob Orton would come in from time to time and get in the ring with us. Uh, but he Hiro Matsuda wasn't crazy about Barry Orton because Barry Orton was breaking in, but he was already acting like a heel in the ring, and clowning around in the ring because every I was talking to Barry Windham yesterday, and I said, all you guys that had a father in the business, the business came natural for you guys. Excuse me, and you know down the line, Tully, me and Tully went to Florida, and I mean he was having matches, and I used to say I used to watch him, and because that was one of the things they told me, watch all the matches. So I was like a scout. I scouted. I watched every match uh, from beginning to end, and you know when you don't know anything about wrestling, is you don't really know what you're looking for. But when I saw his matches, I knew that this guy knows what the hell he's doing. How did he learn it so fast? But I was talking to Barry. I said I would imagine that Tully had been wrestling for a while, and in the summers for his dad, making money, you know, strapping on the boots at a pretty young age.
Can you give me, I don't know how many weeks or months you were working under Hiro Matsuda, but can you give me, let's say, a typical day of what he would drill you through, the calisthenics, and what he would teach you and what he would not teach you?
Well, we would do conditioning was big, with Hiro Matsuda. Uh, a lot of Hindu squats, just standing up and popping up, squatting and popping up, and doing squats. He didn't try to tear me down. He he uh, he knew that I didn't know anything about wrestling, and he just started me from scratch. I mean, hitting the ropes. He says hitting the ropes can be very dangerous, and I would spend, quite a bit of time just hitting the ropes and hitting the ropes, and my whole side was black and blue. My lats on the right side where I would hit the rope. And he says every time you hit the rope, the right leg is very important because if the rope breaks, if you're not ready to stop yourself, you're going to fly out of the ring and probably get a pretty good injury. And then basic, I would start. He would get down, and I would come across, and I would put my head and do a flip, and I'd land on my back, so I could start learning how to land on my back, and just uh, jumping up and taking a bump, and you got to make a base to and because when they would throw you up, you weren't necessarily going to land straight every time, but you would try. I remember landing on my elbows. My right elbow was always really puffed up, and then like throwing a drop kick, and I was scared to death of throwing a drop kick because just landing, I was scared to death, and you got to throw the drop kick and turn in the air and fall and catch yourself and get right up, and taking back drops. That was because I wasn't very good in the air. Recognition of where I was in space. I remember the first back drop that I started. I guess put my head and flipping and landing, and then another thing that I would do, put my head, grab his waist, and flip over. To control your body. And he taught me step by step. He taught me treated me like a baby. Learning how to walk, and I had to learn how to walk because I didn't know anything. And then I was telling you about Barry doing high spots and stuff like that. When he was gone and his father was not around, he would say, "That idiot is never going to make it in the business." He says, all you need to do is learn the takedowns. He says, learn the takedowns, and you can have a match with anybody. So he was a very basic man, and I'm talking about takedowns, a headlock. Would work on getting a headlock, taking the guy over, the right posture of the body, arm drag, go behind, single, go behind, and a schoolboy, and a single leg drive, a double leg drive, and fireman carry. There were 7 that I can't remember the other one. I just mentioned 6, I think. I can't remember the other takedown, but I would work on takedowns, and he would not work with me doing any high spots. He says the rest you can learn. You can have a match with anybody if you know how to do the takedowns. So
yeah, the fundamentals,
basic fundamentals, and he said, watch the match, watch everybody work. And one of the things that I couldn't understand is how, like, when I was in a match, when I started wrestling, like, I would always humble myself, and I would say, guys, please watch my match, and critique me, and it's pretty hard when somebody critiques you and tells you what you're doing wrong, when you think that it's hard to take critique. But one of the things that I couldn't understand, I would watch the main event matches. How do you start a comeback? And one of the concepts that I had a hard time, and it took me a while. One of the concepts that I had, you start a comeback and you get the people up, when you're fired up, and then the heel ends up on the ground, the people go down, and I would watch, how do these guys get them as soon as they come back? How do they get the people up again? That was very hard for me to understand. But it also took me a while that these guys that were doing this, they had been pushed on TV, and everything they did, the people popped for them. Where I would have to go over there and work my butt out for 20 minutes and get a very little pop, because people didn't know who I was. And, I guess time and being over with the fans,
It's worth its weight in gold. The recognition of and the audience's expectations of you as well,
Right.
as opposed to going in cold.
Yeah. No matter what, once you get over with the fans, no matter what you do, they're going to start pop. They're going to pop for you.
Absolutely. We're going to, and I know I'm skipping through the career here and there, but I'm going to move on to Georgia Championship Wrestling. And soon after you wrestle some notable names in Georgia. Waldo Von Erich, I thought I'd mention. Dean Ho. I used to do a podcast with Don Morocco up until recently. He always used to talk about Dean Ho. And of all people, Pat Patterson. I had no idea he was in Georgia for a short while.
Yes, I did wrestle with these guys, and some of these guys like Dean Ho was always pretty serious, and most of the guys were pretty serious, and then you had the guys like Pat Patterson who used to like to clown around in the ring, and mess with your head, in the matches. But he was so talented that he. I also learned a lot from I tell people that for the first 5 years, I always, every time I stepped into the ring, I stepped into the ring with somebody who was better than me and who was teaching me, and I listened to them. And like, I went to, I'm going to skip over, I went to Minnesota to the AWA, and Greg Gagne told me, Tito, you shouldn't worry about throwing a punch, because I guess my punch at that time wasn't that good. I ended up developing one of the best punches in the business. But he says, just practice your punches to your stomach. You shouldn't throw a punch to the face until 5 years in the business. So I did. I would practice throwing punches, to the stomach. And the way I learned, really in reality, how to throw a punch, because some of these guys were mean looking. I mean, and I remember being in the battle royal, and Harley Race grabbed me in the in the corner. He grabbed me. He says, "Come here, kid. You're gonna learn how to throw a punch today." So he took me in the corner, and he turned himself around and put himself in the corner. He says, "Okay, throw a punch right here." I mean, so I said to myself, I can't believe how these guys talk in the ring, and you never even noticed it before. So I started throwing a punch, and I threw the punch, and learning how to throw a punch is to get rid of the fear of potatoing somebody. So I threw the first punch to his forehead, and he says, "Lay it in, pussy." So then I threw a punch, and Arnie Reyes was the stuff, and again. So I started throwing punches, and then he showed me in the locker room, the technique of throwing a punch. And that was the day that I just recall when I did not have a fear of throwing a punch anymore, and potatoing somebody.
Because you mentioned Harley Race, just an all-time legendary wrestler, but also legendary all-time badass. You've got to give us some Harley Race stories.
Well, I just remember that he was he was a badass, and I had whenever Andre the Giant was in the territory, Andre the Giant knew that he was going to ride with me. I always offered my car to Andre the Giant, and he always traveled with me. And I had just bought a 19. I think it was let me see. I think it was like a brand new 1978 Bonneville. And Harley says, "I'm going to drive this." It was brand new. And I was scared shitless. He was going, we were in Georgia. I forget where we went, maybe Augusta or someplace, and driving 100 miles an hour. I said, "Man, I'm going to die, today." And drinking beer the whole time. He didn't do drugs, but he drank, he drank more beer. He could keep up with Andre, beer to beer, when I used to see them. And but I heard, I never saw that, but I heard that in a bar, many a time Harley Race just, punch the shit out of anybody who would come, mess with him in the bar. He was a hardcore tough guy.
Yeah, and being an enforcer on his own for trips to Japan to like look after Ric Flair or somebody. When all you need is one man against an entire country or company or something, that's says a lot about you.
Oh, sure, yeah.
I'm going to move on. I'm skipping quite a lot here. I wrote the most amount of questions for you I think I've ever written for anybody, so I apologise I'm missing a couple of territories here and there. But one thing I read about you I had no idea about was I didn't know you were in the WWF in 1979, and you were a tag team champion in 1979 until today. There's so many things to ask, but memories of teaming with Ivan Putski, what was he like day to day?
It was a good memory, but the way I got to the WWF in 1979, I don't know if you remember, Murdoch and Mulligan bought the territory from Terry Funk, and they owned Amarillo territory. So they brought me in, and they were going to give me a big push, but Murdoch was a baby face, and he didn't give me a big push, and I was there about 2 months, and they had promised me that they were going to make me a big international star, Hispanic international star. And my first TV taping, I had a draw with another guy that was coming into the territory, and I didn't know I had only been in the business like 2 years, and I didn't know that much about the business, but I knew that if they told me they were going to make me an international star in my first match, and Mulligan wasn't there. Mulligan is the one that wanted to push me, and Murdoch is the one that was running the show, and he was the baby face also, and I was the baby face. So he made me go have a draw against the guy, and I said to myself, when I see somebody else getting pushed, they don't have a draw on TV. They win. That's how the people are going to get behind you, not with a draw. So Andre came by, and when Andre would come in, everything would pop, the territory, because we'd have the battle royals, and people love to see Andre. So I told Andre, I said, Andre, they're treating me like shit here. It's horrible. So he didn't say anything. I said they promised me they were going to do this, and Andre didn't say anything to me. Unbeknown to me, Mario Savoldi was working for Dick Murdoch. Between the two of them, they took a tape from there with one of my matches, and Andre was on his way to New York. He brought the tape and showed it to Vince McMahon, and before you know it, I'm on my way to New York. They brought me in, me and DiBiase. DiBiase was already scheduled to go to New York, and that's how I got to New York. And they didn't make me any promises. I just came in. Vince McMahon just gave me an opportunity to wrestle, and I guess my very first match, I came in. Before I got there, Vince Sr. tells me, I want you to think of a catchy name. Well, I like Santana. So when I was going to start, I told him, I like Santana.
This is the musician Santana, are you saying, or just the surname in general?
Yeah, right. And he says, okay. So I went into the ring. The very first match, they said, you're going to be Tino, Tino Santana. And they used to record the matches. I said, okay. So, excuse me, I had my first match. I'm walking back through the curtains. Vince Sr. and Vince Jr. were waiting for me. They grabbed me, and they said, you're going to be Tito Santana from now on. I said, you can call me whatever you want. I don't care. I'm just happy to be here. So that's how Tito Santana came about. So I guess they liked, the way I wrestled, and before you know it, I'm teamed up with Ivan Putski, and our business always seemed like it was not everybody got along, all the time. There was a lot of jealousy. There was positions, the top spot, and you work your way down. The higher you up, the more money you would make. And when the other boys found out that I was going to be teamed up with Ivan Putski, to me that was a big break. That elevated my my standing in professional wrestling, world tag team champion. They would say Ivan doesn't know how to work. You're going to be doing all the selling. I didn't care. That's one of the things that I would do good in the ring was I was a good seller, and people bought the way I used to sell, and I had fire. I would fight. I would never die when I was selling. I considered myself, I was the weak link of the tech team, especially at that point in my career. And Andre and Putski would come in, and I was naive, but I was upfront, and I told Ivan, I said, Ivan, this is what the guys are saying to me. They tell me that you're just going to, take advantage of me, and I'm going to do all the selling. And he says, Tito, the reason they're saying that to you is because they're jealous. He said, and he told me, I'm the one that went up to Vince and told them, why don't you team me up with Tito? He says, I liked you from the beginning, and, to me, that was the best experience that I ever had was, it was a short-lived run with Ivan Putski, but, we dropped the belts to the Samoans, and then Vince Sr., when we dropped the belts, he said, Tito, that's when I made Vince Sr. my every move in the business I would make, I would consult with Vince McMahon. He said, you can stay around if you want. I'll give you work here. He says, but I would prefer if you would go somewhere else and get more experience. And then when you come back, you'll be polished and you'll be ready to work on top.
Yeah.
And I said, Vince, I'll do whatever you want. I was single at the time. And I said, he said, well, where would you like to go? I said, well, I knew I had heard Minnesota was a great territory to work. I said, my first territory, my favorite territory that I would want to go to is Minnesota. And then my second one would be to Texas. I feel like, Joe Blanchard got me started. If it's time for me to go and give back some of what they gave to me, maybe it's time for me to go back. So 3 weeks later, I come back to TV, and Vince Sr. calls me in. He says, "You're booked in Minnesota. This is your starting date." He booked me in Japan. I had gone to Japan about a year earlier. He booked me in Japan, and the first time I went to Japan, I got $1,000 a week. Vince booked me in Japan. I got $18,000 a week, which was a lot of money back then. This was in 1979, 1980.
18,000. Are we talking $1,800
a week? $1,800 a week.
I was going to say you were beating that $80,000 a year sort of thing quite quickly there.
Yeah,
promises are coming true.
No, yeah, but $1,800 a week was, all cash. And I felt like I was on my way, and like I finally. With Vince, I started making pretty good money, and then I went to Minnesota, and you could make in Minnesota, you could make good money, and you live like a normal human being because we'd only work in New York, you'd wrestle like 350 days a year, in Minnesota, you'd wrestle like maybe 220 days a year, and you had the summers were slow, and he just didn't run shows in the summer. It was great being there.
Can I ask this? It's one more thing about Ivan Putski is, and I've heard this maybe a couple of times before from other guys at the time, is that Ivan was not the most liked in the locker room, but no one can quite put the finger on why. And I was told maybe that quite possibly some people were jealous of how popular Ivan was, and that's why he was engendering some bad feelings.
Yeah, a lot of the people didn't like him because he had a pretty good deal with Vince. he would go home every day during the middle of the week, and then he would come back and work like the big shows only. And Vince McMahon would give him the rent a car, So he had a pretty good deal, and he wouldn't do jobs for anybody that he wouldn't sell, very much. You know, he was Ivan Putski, powerful. I mean, what a body he had. I don't know if you've seen Ivan Putski lately, but Ivan maybe weighs 140, 150 pounds. He's really shrunk. But at that time, I mean, he had those huge legs, and he was a powerful man. Uh, I think a lot of the guys, and he traveled by himself. He didn't hang around with the guys. He wasn't doing drugs. He wasn't drinking. He was all about training, and he would travel by himself, do his match, leave, and you know. I think jealousy was the main reason that, and the fact that he would always go over. He was kind of like in the same boat as the Mil Mascaras.
Mm.
A lot of people didn't like Mil Mascaras, because Mil Mascaras was the same way. He didn't sell too much for a lot of the guys, and never got beat.
And he was
in
popular.
the ring. He was popular, and a lot of people didn't like him either. Because they managed to get their own deal.
Definitely. I will bring up a couple more names. You've already mentioned Andre the Giant, and I can never hear Andre without hearing some drinking stories, some just hanging out with Andre stories, some playing cribbage with Andre stories. But the most drinks that you saw Andre drink in one sitting?
Oh, I know the legendary over 100 bottles of beer. I just know that we'd buy cases of beer, and when he held the beer, it was like a little bottle. It wouldn't take him long to drink the beer. And what was ironic, if I would drink a few beers, I would have to have a pit stop, to pee on the side of the road. Andre would drink and drink and drink and never pee. But I remember standing next to a urinal, peeing with Andre after we'd been drinking for quite a while, and I said, "Man, it sounded like an elephant was peeing next to me." He just kept coming. But he would drink, and he would drink pretty much all day long. And I remember him coming in drunk to the arenas and passing out, or just laying out on the floors, because we would play cards. But when he was drunk, he would just lay. There was some times when he was pretty drunk, and he would just lay on the floor. He would get dressed and lay out. And the amazing thing, he was, to me, I said, "Man, this guy's gone." And they would say, "Andre, you next," and he would get right up and go to the ring and work. That was to me something amazing that I couldn't understand how he would do it. He was a great man. He took a liking to me, and uh, Andre would always pick up the tab. Especially when I first got started, he knew that he was making pretty good money forever. And then when I got to New York and I started making pretty decent money, we would go out and I would pick the tab, and he was very appreciative of that. He didn't let me do it too much, but once in a while I was able to sneak a. Uh, I couldn't afford to pick up the tab with him.
What was I don't think anyone really asked this, but what were his favourite drinks? I know he liked a red wine, I think maybe as well, but his favourite beers and his favourite wines. Do you remember?
No, I don't remember. I remember that whenever we go to different places, we stay in the same hotels, and every hotel that ever we went to, they had a big glass of a huge glass where they would fill the beer up for him. Nobody else used Andre's glass. Only when it was there for him whenever he came in. and he did like a lot of his favorite wine was red wine. And I remember we were in Japan and we went to see a movie, and we came out, and he bought a red wine. I didn't know, and I still don't know anything about wines. Uh, and he paid like $100 in the late '70s for a wine. He says, "Here, boss, taste this." He gave me a little bit. I wasn't a wine drinker, and it tasted so. It was so a really good taste, and I couldn't even tell you the name of the wine that it was. And he told me this bottle is I don't know how many years old, and you know, he was very knowledgeable about wines, and I couldn't even tell you what kind of liquor he would drink. He would drink wine, he would drink beer, he would drink shots, and he would drink liquor, and he just did it all.
I'll ask you one more WWF question of the original run, then we'll move on to the AWA. But one other thing that I hadn't realised is that you wrestled Hulk Hogan a lot in singles matches in 1980, and I think you guys started pretty much at the same time. You both started in Florida as well. Where was Hulk Hogan in his development as becoming as a worker as compared to you?
Hogan was a little bit behind me. I started a little bit ahead of him, and like he started, and I think he went to Memphis and
the Fullers. I think he went wrestled for the Fullers at one point.
Yeah, and they sent him back to gain weight, and because he wasn't very big, and I don't know. Hogan was a little clumsy in the ring. He didn't have the best postures, and like us. I'm sure I was the same way. He was learning, but he was also picking it up pretty fast. And knowing that we were about the same, I think he confided in me, and we used to talk to each other, and I'd give him advice. And when I left New York, he booked me in Japan. Hogan was right behind me because we wrestled each other towards the end quite a bit, and Hogan still wasn't Hulk Hogan until he came back. I don't think he was Hulk Hogan until he came back the second time around, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong.
I think the Hulk Hogan presentation was developed in the AWA in the last year or so there, and then very late '83 comes back to the WWF, wins the title almost immediately, and then they're off to the races.
Right. Yeah. So we both go to Japan, and he would always ask me, because he was a big guy, and I had been in Japan for 3 weeks. I was there with Dusty Rhodes and Andre the Giant and some other stars, Americans, and then Hogan came like the last 3 weeks, and he says, "What do you do here?" And I said, "I don't know. I was 235 pounder. I had to wrestle my ass off. Fight for my life in Japan. Hogan was 310, 320. I said, Hogan, I said, what I watch here, I said, Sten Hansen was there also. I see the big guys just go in there and beat the shit out of the Japanese guys. I said, so go in there and just beat the shit out of Japanese guys. So that's what he did, and he went in there and just pummeled the Japanese guys, and he got over pretty fast. And then both of us went to the AWA. Well, no, he didn't go to the AWA. He was scheduled to go to the AWA, but he went to the movie Rocky. I don't know if you remember. Hogan told me, he said, Paul Orndorff, Gorilla Monsoon, and Hulk got letters from Sylvester Stallone to do the part of in the Rocky movie, and Hogan was the only one that answered it.
Really?
And that's how he got the part. So I went to the AWA, and then Hogan goes and does the part in Rocky, and then he comes back with the cape that he used in Rocky, and Vern tried to push him as a heel, and I don't know if you remember, they put Johnny Valiant as his manager, and they would throw in two guys, and they try to push him as a heel. He would beat the crap out of two baby faces, and the people just kept cheering and cheering and cheering. Finally, they got rid of Johnny Valiant, and they made him a baby face. They tried to push him as a heel, and it didn't work. So, and then he got over like $1 million.
What's to boo there? It's like massive, huge, great, great. I'm not talking handsome, but great-looking guy on TV who beats the crap out of two people at once. What's to hate? That's something to get behind, right. Surely.
But that's what they used to do back then. If a guy would come in and just beat the heck out of a baby face, they would make you a heel. That's what the heels would do. So that's what Hulk was doing. But the fans didn't care. They just. He would open that cape, and I don't know if you remember. I think it was purple inside and gold and purple, and he was so impressive. I mean, he what a body he had, and he used to talk about his 22-inch pythons, and I mean, to me, that was the beginning of history.
It worked out well for him, and we're going to talk about you going to the AWA now. And did Vern Gagne ever try and get you to marry one of his daughters in exchange for an AWA title run?
No. I had that's when I met my wife. I was living with the girl. And no. I never had. But he did have I think 3 or 4 daughters that he had, and I think, well, one of them married Larry Sabisco. So, and the other ones I don't know.
No, you were happily married at the time. But sorry, I'll forego that one. Speaking of AWA champion, I mean, you would wrestle Nick Bockwinkel for the title quite a few times later on in your AWA run. But was there any ever thought given to you being the next face of the AWA and having a run with the title?
I don't think I don't think they ever considered me for the AWA title, because I was there for 2 years, and it was a good 2 years for me. But I had a good run with Nick Bockwinkel. I had my first feud with the Sheik, Adnan
El Casey. Yeah,
that was my first feud that I really felt where I learned a lot, because you were doing interviews of what happened to you in the match, and it was so much easier when you had something to talk. Up until then, I was just doing generic interviews and generic, and you had to brag about yourself without bragging about yourself, and they were so hard. But the first feud that I had, when he attacked me and left me there laying, and I got juice in the ring, and it was, and it wasn't a very serious feud, because we did it in the summer when they didn't run too many shows, and him and I were going to shows, but we drew some pretty good crowd, considering it was in the summer, so we did pretty good business. And then I had another run with me and Rick. Me and Dino Bravo also teamed up, and we wrestled against the High Flyers, and we got over with the fans, but nobody was going to get over the High Flyers, because it was, Greg and Jim Brunzell. And then that didn't last very long. And then I got another little run with which lasted pretty good. And we were in many main event matches. That's when I started getting, the biggest payoffs that I ever had in the business. Me and Rick Martel against the High Flyers. I mean, the people loved our match. We used to have some great matches. We even had our matches, we used to call them draws. where we went a whole hour. We ran out of time, and the fans wanted us to beat them. I guess they were tired of Greg Gagne, weighing 180 pounds, being the champion. But one thing about Greg, he was small, but I mean, there wasn't too many people who had a better mind, for the business and how to run a match.
Do you think Greg Gagne gets a bit of a bad rap as far? I mean, because physically he looked like nothing, but for people paying attention, he really knew what he was doing as a wrestler.
Yeah, I think he gets a bad rap, and a lot of the heels. Like I was there when I saw him giving Big John Studd hip tosses. You know? So I can see where the people and the boys would get upset. But he was the boss's son. But I never realized how talented he was until I wrestled him in the match, and how because he would call the match. I would listen to him, and I realized what great psychology, and his interviews were just right on the money. He was good. He earned what he got. It was given to him, but he earned it. He just he didn't work for it.
I've got a few other names that you work with. Mad Dog Vachon, Adrian Adonis. We mentioned Dino Bravo, Nick Botwinkle, Crusher Blackwell as well. But who am I going to ask it? Probably Mad Dog Vachon, because I always like a good Mad Dog story. I take it the plane that he nearly crashed that time when he'd had too much whiskey. That was before your time when you were in the company.
Yeah, I heard that he opened the door of the plane. And I guess the guys panicked. When when he opened the door, I think they had to land the plane, and I don't think they let him fly in the plane anymore after that.
Don't blame him.
Or didn't let him drink. I never flew in the plane with him, but I mean, I don't know if you know, but Vachon was an Olympic wrestler for Canada, and they say that he was a tough guy. He was a mean-looking guy. I mean, there's no way that I would want to mess with him in a bar.
Did you ever actually wrestle him one-on-one?
No, I don't think I ever did. He was, main event, all the time. Feuding with top guys. I never got to that level, other than with the high flyers and a few matches with Dino Bravo, but they had a different level. The main. I never got all the way up there where I was consistently main event matches.
I'll ask you probably a couple more questions, then we'll have a little break. This is a 2-hour interview, if I hadn't said that before, and then we'll do probably more WWF stuff after that. But going back to Georgia one more time, and whenever I find out someone's worked Georgia, especially in the 80s, I must ask, Ole Anderson as a boss, Ole Anderson as a person.
Well, Ole Anderson is the only guy in the business that I have nothing good to say about. He was not a nice man. He as a matter of fact, he used to call me Mexican, and he was the boss, so he could call you whatever he wanted to. So I never knew if he did it with hate, but I think he was a bit racist. He lied to me. He told the second time that I came to Georgia, again, they were supposed to make me a big international star, and I got there. I had my son when I came from Minnesota, and I had my son. He was a brand new baby. I think he was 6 months old when No, as a matter of fact, he was born in Georgia. My wife was 8 months pregnant when we got there, and I bought a condominium, and I figured I was going to, because they told me I was going to be an international star. I said, well, I should be making some pretty good money, and he didn't do anything with me. I say, Oli, when are you gonna start pushing me? He says, I'm not ready yet. I'm not ready yet. I'm not ready yet. I'm not ready yet. And then before you know it, he says, Bill Watts wants you to come to Louisiana. So he started booking me. Uh, I came in with a guarantee, and Oli got rid of my guarantee because Barnett is the one that brought me in. So finally, he told me, he says, Barnett brought you in. I didn't bring you in. So he kept BSing me and BSing me and BSing me. So he started booking me in Louisiana. Uh, and I didn't really want to go to Louisiana because Mr. Wonderful, Paul Orndorff, had been in Louisiana. And he told me, Tito, the trips there are really, really long. You're on the road all the time. And he says, and the payoffs, are not good. Bill Watts will screw you on the payoffs. That's what Paul would tell me. But so he booked me in Louisiana, and I go the first week in Louisiana, and I get my payoff, and I tell Paul how much I made, and he says, boy, he must really want you, because I was only in the second or third match. I was in the main event, and I got pretty good payoffs. And after a while, I realized that Ole and Bill Watts, were working me to get me to go move to Louisiana, so Ole wouldn't have to do anything with me. So finally, they worked the hell out of me. I don't know. Do you have time to listen to this story?
Of course, yeah, absolutely. It's what we're here for.
So they're working the shit out of me, and I finally, Ole is making like nothing in Atlanta, and Bill Watts is paying me good money. So I knew that Bill Watts wanted me. So then we're doing a TV taping somewhere, and I said, Bill, I'd like to talk to you about coming in. I called my wife, and I said, I'm gonna talk to Bill Watts. I said, I'm getting paid money here. We had just bought the condo. I said, we'll get rid of the condo. I said, I'm gonna talk to him. So Bill Watts is watching the matches, and I walk up to him and I said, Bill, whenever you have a chance, I'd like to talk to you about me coming in. I figured I could ask for a guarantee, and he wanted me so bad, and he says, I'll talk to you. This was on a Tuesday. I'll talk to you Friday in Houston. So I said, there goes all my negotiation power. He doesn't even want to talk to me, and I said, and I was green. I didn't know, how much value I had. So I called Vince McMahon, and I said, Vince, Ole's treating me like shit in Atlanta. I said, Bill Watts has been pretty nice to me. I'm going to talk to him about coming to Bill Watts. So he says, Bill Watts is a good man. I said, okay. So I tell my wife, I said, I'm gonna talk to Bill Watts on Friday. So I get to the arena on Friday in Houston, and I walk into the arena, and Ernie Ladd tells me, he says, Tito, you got the biggest decision to make in your life tonight. He says, Bill Watts wants you really bad. And I said, and Vince McMahon wants you really bad. He wants you to come back to New York. And I said to myself, God, I said, there's no choice. I'm going back to New York. My wife was from New Jersey. So Bill Watts comes in, and he takes me in the room, and he says, you got a lot of talent, but you need a little bit of polishing. he says, I can polish you here, and you will be a main eventer wherever you go. And I said, Bill, I said, I know I can tell you where I'm going to go to New York. He said, don't think about it. Don't make the decision uh, right away. He says, but McMahon wants you to call him in the morning. So it's the way I live it with Bill Watts. So in the morning, I called Vince McMahon, and I said, Vince, this is Tito Santana. So I heard Vince McMahon wanted me really bad in New York. I figured he was going to start making me all kinds of offers. And Vince McMahon is quiet on the line. And it seemed like he didn't talk to me for forever. And I'm just getting frustrated. I said, don't tell me that Vince McMahon is on the freaking work. Now you got Ole and Vince and Watts working me. And I kind of got pissed off. And I said, Vince, the reason I called you is because I was told to call you. And that tone. And he says, yeah, your starting date is May the 10th. It was 1983. And the reason I remember the starting date is because it was my birthday. So I never forgot that. He says, we're going to bring you in. And before that, the first time I just went in. This time, when they're going to give you a push, you do 2 weeks of TV taping. And then you you do every 2 weeks, every 3 weeks you go and you do 2 TV tapings. So for 3 weeks, I would do the TV taping, and then I go back, and then I wasn't working for Ole anymore. I was only working for Bill Watts. Bill Watts, Ernie Ladd told me, he says, here's the book. He says, you tell me when you want to work. So I would pick all the big shows, and they would fly me back and forth. That was the best that I ever got treated. I was just working the big shows and making good money. And he says, Bill Watts wants you, when you get done there, he wants you to come back here. So now I had the upper hand again. So they fly me in. They give me a rent-a-car. I mean, I fly, back and forth. I was only working like 3 or 4 days a week and making more money than I was making before. So, I mean, that was my first big experience of dealing with the promoters. Every freaking promoter that I had worked for lied to me, made me promises that they didn't keep. Vince was the only one, and Vince never made me any promises. He says, they brought me in. Before you know it, Jimmy Snuka was having problems, and before you know it, I'm the Intercontinental champion, and I beat Don Morocco, and it kind of pulled me to the top right away.
We're going to be talking about Don Morocco. Just before we go for our sort of mid-interview quick break, you mentioned Jim Barnett. Everybody has a Jim Barnett impression. Do you have a Jim Barnett impression?
Well, I just remember my boy, how you doing, my boy? Well, everybody knows that Jim Barnett was gay, right? You know that, right?
Oh, yeah.
So everybody knew that. And apparently Ricky Steamboat was in Atlanta, and he had gone. Ole got rid of him and they sent him to Charlotte, and Ricky Steamboat got over like $1 million. I don't know if he was Ricky Steamboat in Atlanta or not, but he was Ricky Steamboat in Charlotte, and he got over like $1 million. And Jim Barnett flew to Charlotte to get permission from Ricky Steamboat, and they gave me the name Richard Blood. So I was using Ricky Steamboat's real name, and they made me Richard Blood. And he says, "My boy, you're gonna be." I flew to Charlotte to get permission to use Ricky Steamboat's real name. You're gonna be Ricky Steamboat, and we're gonna make you some money here, my boy. I was I was gonna I think I told you I was going to go back to play to get start training for football, and then they brought me to Atlanta
Mhm.
pretty quick, and they were going to give me a big push, but when I got to Atlanta, I think I only had like 4 matches. So I just they keep telling me they're going to give me a big push. I knew that I wasn't ready for a big push. I just wasn't ready. I had 4 matches. Uh, you know, it's not the way our business works. We've seen it where they put guys that are not ready and they just flop. But you know, he was good to me. I like Jim Barnetti. He never made any passes at me, so I was good.
Can I, well, I'll tell you what, do you want to go for a quick break, or do you want to just push through and we'll just go through the other hour? It's entirely up to you.
How much time do we have?
About 55 minutes remaining.
Uh, we can keep going.
Keep going?
I'm okay.
Okay,
Yeah.
then, super duper. Right, we're going to go through it. We're going to ask so many questions that I'm just going to make your head spin, I'm sure. WWF, you go in. You mentioned Jimmy Snuka, in fact, and the fact that you became WWF Intercontinental Champion partly because Jimmy Snuka was having problems. What did you understand those problems were at the time? What were you told?
Well, I remember. Uh, I know a lot of it was drug problems. Like a lot of the guys, cocaine was rampant in the business. And the night that uh, I started was May 10th. When I woke up in the morning after the first TV taping, I find out that a girl that was with him had died, and nobody ever knew what really happened. But that was also, some of the problems that were going on. Uh, I knew Jimmy, and Jimmy was a very nice guy. But from what I understand, he would pull up to the arena, be all messed up, and he had a driver, and he would drive up to the arena, and he would say, "Not tonight," and go to the hotel. So he would just go and party at the hotel, and you know, who knows?
Mm.
Who knows what was going on? I don't know what happened. I don't really like to talk about it. I just know that when I woke up in the morning, I heard that the girl had passed, and that's all I know.
Yeah, absolutely. So from that, as what you told me beforehand, is sort of the reason that you end up in the IC title picture then. How did you end up getting picked so quickly, and did it sort of make your head spin that you were now going to be in such an elevated position after several years and on the undercard?
No, I again, Jimmy Snuka was over like $1 million. I mean, everywhere he, went, the places were sold out. Even when he wouldn't show up, all these big arenas were completely sold out because he was so big. I think the intentions were to put the Intercontinental title on Jimmy, but they knew that of the problems that were before she passed away. Uh, the drug problems, the missing shows and stuff like that were happening. So, what's his name? The Oriental wrestler,
Mr. Fuji?
Fuji,
Yeah.
Mr. Fuji. Uh, all of a sudden, I'm wrestling with Mr. Fuji every night, and Mr. Fuji, because I had only been in the business. Let me see.
Would have been about 5-6 years.
But 4 or 5 years. When I went back, and Mr. Fuji is talking to me about timing, timing. I still didn't understand timing. And Mr. Fuji uh, was teaching me, and he would say, you can throw 20 drop kicks that don't mean anything in a match, or you can throw one drop kick. If you throw it in the right time, the people will go crazy. He says, it's what you do when you do it. And I said, timing, timing, I got to watch it. Ask me what time it is. I can tell you, timing. So I'm wrestling him in Wildwood. And I used to, because Mr. Fuji was a tough guy. He had a reputation. You didn't mess with Mr. Fuji. And I'm wrestling with him, and we're going, I'm supposed to beat him. And most of the match, he's got me selling. And then all of a sudden, with about a minute left in the match, he says, "Okay, Tito-san, bring your arm up." We're down in the mat. He says, "Bring your arm, start shaking your arm, shake it some more, get on your knees, get up, throw a punch." And he punched me. He says, "Keep coming, beat the crap out of me." And then he would call all the spots, and I beat him with a flying forearm, and the people exploded. And it's the first time that he would say, "Listen to the people." He says, "Did you hear the people?" And I said, "Yeah." I mean, it's the first time when he would say, "Shake it more, shake it." The more I would shake it, the more the people would come, And that was the first time in a match that I really experienced, and I felt the crowd, because he would, that's why we learned from guys, always wrestling with guys who were better. Uh, you know, he would tell me that people would tell you what to do, and I couldn't understand that. The people would tell you when to do stuff like that, and uh, we manipulated the people, but the people were the ones that manipulated the match also. And I learned that from Mr. Fuji, and then before you know it, I'm wrestling with Mr. Fuji. I beat John Studd in a match somewhere in Massachusetts. I didn't know that I'm going to get the belt. I didn't know they're prepping me to get the Intercontinental belt all this time. And then I wrestle with Mr. Fuji, and I do which they never covered the finish in the match. Mr. Fuji is giving me on the finish. We came up with this finish, and that's the finish that I used when I beat Morocco for the title. He'd been working me. I'm making a comeback, and he stops me, and Mr. Fuji gives me a tackle, and then he goes for another tackle, and I jump up in the air, and I hook him with my legs, and I sunset flipped him. And 1, 2, 3 out of nowhere, and I practiced it that night. The next night I wrestled Morocco in Boston Madison Square Garden, and that's the finish. That's when I find out that I'm going to beat, I'm going to be the Intercontinental champion, and that's the finish that I used to beat Don Morocco. Unknown to me, all this had been planned for quite a while.
Does it bother you that this is probably the very last Intercontinental title change? It was in the Boston Garden that wasn't recorded, or the footage is lost. Have you ever seen it back? Have you ever seen the video?
I never saw. They told me that they ran out of tape. It does bother me because I show up with my interviews, but nobody saw. It was a great finish. If they would have showed the finish, it would have helped me get over more. But I don't know if they just didn't think that I was going to be able to carry it, or what. When I got back, what was ironic to me is that that's when I found out that they didn't tape it. Gorilla Monsoon was gone. Vince was gone. Everybody, all the agents were gone. I just didn't think. I thought they just made a transition. Uh, there was going to be just a quick transition where I drop it to another heel.
Mm.
But they never gave me an explanation. They just said, they ran out of tape. When do you run out of tape? Give me a break.
Yeah. So I mean, what's your theory then of why it wasn't recorded? Do you think they just? You tell me what your theory is. In fact.
Well, my theory is that they weren't gonna give me the big push, and they didn't realize that I was gonna get over as much as I did. But there was a time when Bobby Heenan told me that my T-shirts were outselling Hulk's T-shirts, and I was getting more fan mail than the Hulk was. And Hulk Hogan was Vince's baby, so I don't think they were going to let anybody get over. They didn't want anybody to get over Hulk because Hulk was the one that was getting pushed the most. But uh, I think all that in combination, they just wanted to get me to get over to a point, and I don't think they realized that the people bought into me as much as they did.
Yeah.
But who knows? I mean, I don't know. It's hard to tell. It's a nasty business, and Vince McMahon could make anybody. Hogan was the one that was chosen, but I believe there was so many wrestlers that he could have done it with. He chose Hulk. I mean, there were so many guys that were over. The way Vince pushed. Vince was brilliant. He knew how to push and get somebody over. It just happened to be the Hulk that he pushed, and of course, Hulk had a lot to offer. Also,
it's because he didn't do bad in the role. I mean, you've got to give him that.
Right? No. I mean, Hulk got over. Like, to me, I always say Hulk was like the Elvis to professional wrestling, and I did well because I was in the same territory with Hulk for many, many years. So wherever Hulk was at, when Hulk got to Minnesota, all the buildings were selling out. So I was making money because Hulk was there. It took a team to sell out the crowd, but Hulk was the main event.
Yeah, trickle down economics, I believe it's called.
Right. Yeah.
Can I ask you this then? Because you mentioned just before that your T-shirts at one point were outselling Hulk Hogan's. You're in a perfect position to answer this question. Is WWF merchandising royalties, the dolls, the T-shirts, the computer game appearances, what paid best?
Well, for me, royalties didn't ever paid very much.
What was the percentage? Was it like 1% or something?
No, 0.025% is what the boys. Is what we were getting back then. So, I hate to say this, but the biggest royalty I got was $18,000, and we were selling like over $1 million of merchandise. Not much. Nobody was complaining because we were making money with the house shows. For the time we were making pretty good money. My I was supposed to be out on the first batch of figures when they first came out, but for some reason they broke the mold, and I didn't come out in the first batch. The first batch, the guys made like $100,000, and I don't know if they cut the pay, but I know that I came out in the next batch. My figure came out in the next batch, and I made $18,000. I never forget. I was in Philadelphia, and we had a show, and Arnold Skolin gave us the envelopes with the money for the royalties, And me and Captain Lou Albano, the other guys that made $100,000, we said we'll be happy with 50,000.
Mm.
So I opened up my envelope right in front of Arnold's skull, and I don't think this got over very well. And I was expecting at least 50 to 100, because I was over pretty good. And I see $18,000 on the check, and I thought something was wrong. So I keep looking at it, and then I look at Arnold, and I go like this, and, so I'm sure Arnold went back and told Vince, because they were all, would tell Vince everything, and that didn't help me with Vince.
I'm gonna start because we're running a bit out. Well, not running out of time, but I've just, for the amount of questions I've written, we're running out of time. So some of these are going to be sort of non sequiturs. But one thing that I have to ask more than anything is you're feuding with Greg Valentine. You defeat him for your second IC title run in a cage match, and Greg destroys the old title belts, the one with the green leather backing, and what happened with the belt?
I don't know if you know the story. You probably know the story already, but
I may have set you up for the story slightly there, but yeah, you got to tell me the full thing.
So back then, when you were a champion, the person that beat you would get the title, right?
Right.
So I beat Greg the Hammer for the title, so I got the belt. I stood in the middle of the cage and, raised it up in the air, but it was all beaten up. Greg did a pretty good number on the belt. He destroyed it against the cage. The leather was, it was barely hanging in. So I took it home, and they were going to make me a new belt. So I had that belt in my freaking gym. I have a gym in my house, and I just had it on the floor, so I could look at it, it reminded me. And I must have had that belt in my gym, and I would say that's garbage. It's all beat up. It's worthless. So after about 10 years, I put it in the garbage and I threw it away. And I can kick myself. People have told me that belt would probably be worth about 50 grand, now, the way things are selling. But I don't know if you know the story behind the feud. We had the longest feud in the history of the WWF. We wrestled each other for a year and a half. But Mr. Wonderful is the one who tore my knee the night before we did the TV taping in Brentford. Mr. Wonderful crossed my legs. He was so powerful, he shanked on my leg and popped my cartilage. And Andre helped me to my room in Pittsburgh, and from Pittsburgh we worked. We flew to Brentford, Ontario, and I walked into crutches. They were having a meeting. They were having the agent meetings, getting the show ready. And I told Vince, I said, Vince, my knee's bad. I'm going to need some time off. I said, it would be nice if I could do an angle. I said, Paul messed up my knee last night. If we could do an angle, on TV, I said, I'd like to do an angle with Mr. Wonderful. And they said, well, let us think about it. And before you know it, they didn't trust Paul, because Paul was bipolar and he would flip. Paul would tell the promoters off. So they didn't trust Paul. So George Scott was the booker, and he said, and they said, you're going to do the angle with Greg the Hammer. So I taped up because I played football. I had trainers tape up my knee when he was hurt in the past, so I knew how to tape up my knee. Where I taped up my knee real good, where it would hold it together pretty good, and then I had a brace, and I put a knee pad, so a lot of people really didn't see the brace. So the minute I put my head through the ropes. Greg attacked me, and I didn't have to do nothing other than take the figure four. Yeah, and and it got over. And I had the surgery a couple of days later, and believe it or not, I had the surgery. I think I had a couple of treatments, and I had a match in Madison Square Garden 10 days later, and they booked it. We were the main event in Madison Square Garden, and there wasn't much that I could do because it was only 10 days, but it was still, surgery is surgery. So again, I taped up my knee pretty good. And so I told Greg, I said, Greg, on my interviews, I said, I want to follow through with my interviews. And the only thing I can do is we're going to have a dogfight. So when I walked in, I was able to run, and I double leg dived Greg. I took him to the ground, and we just beat the crap out of each other on the floor. And finally, Greg just left, and he got counted out. And we came back on a no count out, or and we just people bought it. People bought it. That it was the real, because they showed they filmed the surgery. And before I went into the surgery and they put me out, I told the guys who were going to be doing the interview from the WWF, I said, I want you to do the interview as soon as I wake up, because I knew that I would be groggy and the people could feel that. I didn't have to fake the fact that I was, in pain, groggy. So the minute that I woke up, they were right there with the cameras, and they asked me, and I knew what I wanted to say, but there's no way that I could get too excited, and we built from that.
Yeah. I'm currently, as we record this, about a month away from. I tore my ACL last month, and just even the thought of doing anything like, you know what I mean, anything exerting or putting pressure on my leg, it's like, how you did it after 10 days, I don't know.
I don't either. But back then, if you didn't wrestle, you didn't get paid.
Man, I'd take the pay cut. I'm telling you at this point. Seriously, after a month, I'll ask this. Another non sequitur, so I apologise about that. But where were you the day that Dr. D, Dave Schultz, slapped John Stossel?
I was in the locker room, and all of it didn't take long for the news to get back to the locker room. They said Dr. D just slapped the shit out of somebody out there, doing an interview. I mean, Dr. D was Dr. D was Dr. D. He would come in. He was always beating somebody up. I guess he wouldn't take shit from anybody. If somebody would flip him a bird, and he'd go and slap him, and anywhere. So every time I'd see Dr. D in the locker room, I'd say, Dr. D, who'd you beat up today? Because he was always getting into problems outside of the wrestling world. But it was a slap heard around the world.
It was probably felt around the world as well. That was one hard slap, let me tell you.
Yeah, he laid it on.
Are you in favor of that kind of thing when someone questions your business? Were you always the kind of person to? I mean, were you always a good guy all the way throughout your career? You never had to, beat up fans to sort of prove your worth.
Yeah, I try to be a heel. When me and Rick Martel split up, I asked Vince if I could be the heel, but unbeknown to myself, they had already worked out the whole angle of the when Rick Martel came back in as the model. It had already been in progress. You always, got a little offended, because we took a lot of pride back then. I don't know how old you are, but back then, a lot of people believed that wrestling was on the up and up, because we used to beat the crap out of each other in the ring. So it was a little insulting when somebody insulted you. But I would always tell them, is that, it's 90% real, so it's 90% real. So there's 10%, and to us back then it was real. What was not real? The ending, because Vince decided who was going to win, who was going to go over. But in the meantime, we got paid on the houses. That's where we made our money. We didn't get anything else. So we used to make it look pretty real. Back then.
Absolutely.
And people believed it, and I remember when the first time I went into a locker room, Tully Blanchard took me in Amarillo, and he took me into the Heels locker room, and I looked at the Heels, and I was a pretty good sized boy. I was a football player, and I said to myself, I looked at the guys in the locker room, and I said, every one of these guys could probably kick my ass and eat me up and spit me out. That they were there wasn't too many fans who were willing to. It would happen from time to time, but there wasn't too many fans who were willing to go in there and take on one of the boys.
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose like later on the night, the drinks would flow, the courage would get up, and then someone would try their luck on a wrestler. But I'm going to move on, and Jesse Ventura has named you as his absolute all-time favorite opponent. I'm assuming you know that, but what was it about Jesse, or what was it that Jesse loved about you so much?
Because I would let Jesse beat Jesse. Jesse had so much charisma, and we wouldn't even talk. We would walk into the ring, and we would go about 10 minutes without touching, and he'd have the people ready to come in the ring and kill him. He got so much heat. He just knew exactly how to get heat. Just the way he was, the way he walked. And then he would do, we had the simplest matches where we go to lock up. He'd lift up my arm and hit me. But he was smart. He would do everything behind the referee where the referee wouldn't see it. So he'd give me a shot in the ribs, and I would go down and I'd sell the shit out of my ribs. And, I would complain. I would tell the referee, he punched me in the rib, and, we'd go to Jesse, and Jesse would work it, and then we'd do it again. And, we'd go for, 15 minutes with doing nothing. And then I'd make the same comeback with him. Finally I'd block his punch, and I'd do it to him. And then he would sell it. He would leave the ring and, get more heat outside. And, we'd have a 20-minute match with, as little as possible, and you had the fans, going crazy. Did a lot of guys did not let him do his gimmick.
Well, I was going to say, did he have physical limitations in 1986? I know he had the blood clots in his lungs. He'd attribute it to his days in the Navy. But, was he more limited then than he was in the AWA physically? Was he struggling for breath at times, maybe? I don't know.
I never sensed that. He was just a good worker. Yeah. He was just a good worker. It was he would say, it was a night off. Working with Jesse. When I knew I was going to be working with Jesse, it was a night off. And I guess he felt the same way with me. Because I would let him do his stuff. A lot of guys weren't happy with, I worked according to my opponent. If I had to wrestle, I would wrestle. If I had to wrestle a big guy, I would let the big guy do his big guy stuff. Mm-hmm. I wrestled, I adjusted to my opponent, and I became a very good heel where I could do that.
Did when Jesse, because he's like one of the only wrestlers who's got one over on Vince McMahon on more than one occasion. He went to Hollywood, Vince fired him and then had to bring him back because he was such a big star. He sued him successfully for video royalties. Is Jesse just like a hero to the locker room for beating Vince at his own game several times?
Yes, he was. I mean, he was a Jesse. I don't know if you remember. There was a time right before WrestleMania 1 when there was a lot of talk where the boys were gonna unionize. Mm-hmm.
It was two, in fact. It was the one with the 3 different cities, I believe, and Jesse was in LA, I think.
So it was two. Okay, so it was two because nothing was going on in
Yeah.
one. One was so big. Uh, but they had a lot of the boys that were ready to go, but the last guy that they needed that we needed to commit was Hogan, and then Hogan wouldn't commit. Because they said, this is the perfect opportunity to do it. And so when Hogan didn't agree to do it, everything fell apart.
Were you of the opinion that a union in wrestling was needed then, and is it still needed now?
Well, I I think a union is needed. It works for other sports.
You're in a union now. Is it a teachers' union, I'm assuming?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Unions to me protect you. You know, uh, but I don't know how a union could work in wrestling though, because I mean they can keep you in the territory for a month and let you go, and there's nothing the union can do then. I don't really know that a union will ever work in professional wrestling. For that reason. Are you there?
I'm still here. Yeah, I think your phone's
Okay.
getting. I think the phone's getting a call, isn't it? But it's all right. We'll move on. I can still hear and see you. I'm actually
Oh,
gonna.
okay. Good.
I'm gonna skip ahead quite
Okay.
far, and I'm gonna give you a serious question. Is you were in the WWF for the majority of the 80s. You were there for the first few years in the 90s as well. You had about a 10-year run. What do you think the impact was in the very early 90s to the WWF about the various scandals going on? We're talking the Ring Boy scandal, the various steroid scandals, and that kind of thing. Do you think they hit business hard, or was it just a gradual downturn of Hulk Hogan, or what do you think sort of hit the WWF's business hardest?
Well, I don't know. You used to hear that wrestling was bulletproof because I mean there was some pretty big scandals with you know the boys' gays, gay stuff going on, and steroids, and you know, uh, but the business was so strong that it overcame all those scandals. Vince just kept moving on. He he's a brilliant man. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah. With the end of 1992, Ultimate Warrior's fired, Davey Boy Smith is fired, or about to be fired, and Vince and Pat Patterson, I believe, write down a list of 5 people in the company that they can foresee being the WWF Heavyweight Champion going forward. When did you find out that your name was on that list?
I never knew that my name was on the list. Uh, I kind of knew that they were prepping me, and there were some guys in the office that told me that I was going to be the one that was going to be getting the belt. When I beat the Undertaker in Barcelona, Spain, I knew that there was something big coming up for me. But then when they sent me to Mexico to do the El Matador stuff, which I never was really too crazy. I would have been crazy about it if they would have pushed it, but Vince told me he was going to give me a big push, and he never did. But I thought he was when he had me go over the Undertaker. I mean, it was the first match in Barcelona, Spain, in the stadium that they had the basketball Olympics. I was the main event against the Undertaker, totally sold out. They came back a couple months later with Brett as the main event. I was in the middle of the card, and they were going Brett's way already. That's when they decided he might have been the champion already. The house dropped in half. When Brett was the main event. So I think Vince found out that, like, Patterson kept telling me, we're going to go to Mexico, we're going to go to South America, we're going to go into Central America, we're going to go to Spain, and all that fell through. That's when I fell through, and that's when Brett. We're in Canada. And, they had a long meeting, agents meeting with Vince, and Patterson comes and tells me, he says, Tito, it was between you and Brett. It was a very, very tough decision. Well, by that time I had been in the business long enough. Don't bullshit me, don't bullshit a bullshitter. I said, I don't want to hear that I was second best. With you're either first or not. And then a couple hours later, DiBiase comes and tells me, yeah, Pat Patterson just told me that it was between me and Brett. So, and before you know it, there was a couple other guys, God, give me a fucking break.
Yeah.
Does it
the Brooklyn Brawler.
The boys are not going to talk?
I was going to say, the Brooklyn Brawler came up to you and said it was between me and Brett.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, dearie me. That's such a shame, though, as well, because, I mean, seriously, if they had gone into more Hispanic markets, you would have been great. If nothing else, it would have been a great idea to maybe put the Intercontinental title back on you, and then you could be like the semi-main, and then, really get the houses up that way as well. I mean, was that ever a consideration or not?
I don't think there was ever a consideration. I just didn't, Brett got the belt. I think Brett got the belt, was the first one to have the belt, and it took him a long time to get over, because Brett had been, a middle card guy. He wasn't even as high as I was. So it took Brett a long time to get over. And I don't know if you remember when I went back to do the commentating after I left there, I had heard that Brett was really struggling, drawing, anybody else, even Macho Man wasn't drawing, Vince was investing a lot of money and still they wouldn't draw. But when I came back to do the commentating, I couldn't believe how over Brett was. They were selling out. The American and the Canadian really, the whole Hart Foundation was over like $1 million, and they were selling out, everywhere. And he finally got over, and then I hear that they're going to drop the belts. They're going to drop the belt. They're going to get rid of Brett. I said to myself, it took him forever to get over. Now the guy is over. Now they're going to take the belt away from him. But I heard that Shawn Michaels gave Vince an ultimatum. It's either Brett goes or I go. And I mean, you probably heard the same thing too, right? I mean, you hear so many things, and not everything is true, but I think that was true. And I was there. I was there when it happened.
Well, that's exactly what I was going to ask. I didn't know if it was Hugo Savinovich and Carlos Cabrera, or were you at the Spanish announce table at Survivor Series '97?
We were there. We were. I was in the Spanish table with Carlos.
So I take it you obviously no one had any clue what was going to happen apart from a select few. But I mean, how did you end up calling the match? Do you remember what you said when you witnessed what happened?
We had no idea. I mean, they broke our table. They always broke the Spanish table. So we had to get up and continue talking, on our feet. But we were in shock. Sean just beat Brett. We didn't know what was going on, and then you see Brett spitting at Vince and breaking the monitors and going crazy. Then we knew that this was not supposed to be. When all that other stuff was going on, and then we go back in the locker room, and Brett finally goes back in the locker room and goes right straight to Vince's room and goes right in, and from what I understand, punched him. You know, and I heard that Shane was also in the room, and Davey Boy was with. Davey Boy said that he was ready to go after Shane if he would have stepped in, but I don't know if there was I don't know if there was a fight or just one punch or what, but it was a wild night.
Yeah, definitely. We are now going to go to the ending of this interview. We've got about 15 minutes left, and then I will thank you very much for your time and a great interview already, and we shall move on. And I call it the firing line, and basically I'm going to fire some names at you. Now, this is the WWF version of it, so the classic days of the WWF, I'm going to give you some names that I'm sure everyone's asked you about, and some names that maybe you haven't spoken about as well. So the first one is Rene Goulet.
Rene Goulet was a great human being. He just never really made it to the top, but he was a great human being and became a pretty good agent too. He was a good man.
Honky Tonk Man.
Honky Tonk Man was the incarnation of Elvis. He was a Honky Tonk Man is a character. He's on top of everything. He's a good promoter of the Honky Tonk
Man. King Kong Bundy.
King Kong Bundy was, you had to do a count 5. He was a very bitter man at the end. He always felt, well, in the first place, it all started when he was the main event in WrestleMania against Hulk Hogan and got a small percentage of the payoff that Hulk Hogan got, and he was always bitter about that.
Yeah. We'll stick with King Kong Bundy then for a second. I mean, I know he turned into a stand-up comedian later in life, but I mean, was he always the guy cracking jokes and everything, or did his personality switch after WrestleMania 2 and he just wasn't happy to be there?
I think he was a hard guy to figure out. I mean, like Beck, he used to get mad at me because I guess he said that I would never put him over, and he would get mad at me. But he was he wanted me to call him by his real name. I think his real first name is Chris.
Like Chris Pally or Palace or something like that. That's his surname, yeah.
Chris. So I would call him, like back then we used to call each other. I would call Hulk. I wouldn't call him Terry. Honky, Beefcake. We'd call each other by our gimmick names. So I always called him Bundy. Bundy. So he was a Tito. Don't call me Bundy. Call me by my real name. You know who I am. And I just didn't know where he was coming from. Why he would be getting upset, and he was always, the independent guys would bring him in and were making him a living, and he would always knock the independent guys. He was always complaining about payoffs and how he got screwed, and it is what it is.
Yeah, it is what it is. I will move on. Slick.
Slick was slick. It took me a while to figure out that he was a preacher. And he I think he did a good job as with his gimmick. came back with the preacher, but the preacher used to like to go dancing at night.
So many preachers do, though.
He used to like to go dancing. I don't know what that anything else happened besides the dancing, but he said he used to like to dance.
Junkyard Dog.
Junkyard Dog was a guy that would give you his shirt off his back. I met him in Louisiana. He helped me a lot. Unfortunately, he fell into hard times. I remember telling him, JYD, slow down with the gimmick. And he says, Teats, I got it under control. He always had it under control, but he went from one thing to another, and it was a sad ending. But talk about somebody who was over with the fans. I mean, this guy, he had Louisiana jumping. That's why Vince McMahon went and grabbed him.
Definitely. Coco Beware.
Coco Beware was a little guy who was a heck of a worker, and always a happy-go-lucky guy. He up until today, he is the guy that I try to help the most. That I sent guys that are doing shows, or I think I just got him a gig. I don't know if he's been there yet, to go to the UK somewhere, and he called me and thanked me. I always try to get him some stuff, and he's always very grateful. He lost his bird. His house went totally burnt down, and his bird was inside. He couldn't save the bird. And he says, Tito, this is the saddest thing was hearing Frankie crying like a baby, like a real human being, and it was really hard for him.
One thing, since I've been doing these series of interviews, is that whenever I mention Coco Beware, he's just such a badass. I mean, there was Jim Troy, there was Paul Roma, there was Steve Kern. Everyone seems to start a fight with him, and he always ends it.
He always ended it until he faced Jim Duggan. I heard Jim Duggan slapped him in the face, pretty hard. And, I don't think there was a follow through with Jim Duggan, but I was never around with any of those fights. But I heard about Paul Roma, and I heard about the other ones that you mentioned, but just hearsay.
Yeah, you always miss
but,
them.
I know that when I wrestled him, and the way he moved around, I said to myself, if I was in a real fight with this guy, it'd be pretty hard for me to land a good punch on him.
Rick Rude, we'll say.
Revolution Rick Rude. I don't know if you know, he was a tough man himself on the street. Before he got into he was like a street fighter in Minnesota, and I heard that he used to put his finger in his opponent's mouth and just rip the side of the face with his finger. He was they say he was the real thing. He was a tough guy.
Yeah, I've heard that as well. Bruce Pritchard.
Bruce Pritchard. Well, Bruce Pritchard is the one that told me, Tito, you were the one that was supposed to get the belt. He's a guy that never wrestled in the ring, but he learned all the aspects of the ring of wrestling, and he was very knowledgeable. He could run the territory.
Did you ever get ribbed by the British Bulldogs?
No, thank God. Because I saw him do some ribs. They were pretty nasty. I just saw Jacques Rougeau, and he told me about the incident that I wasn't there when they had the fight in Florida, where not Davey Boy, but his partner Dynamite, I guess, beat up Jacques Rougeau, and then I was in the locker room when Jacques Rougeau made his comeback, and I guess he had a roll of dimes in his fist, and he just went and cold cocked him, and he told me, Tito, he says, I knew I was so nervous I couldn't sleep for 2 nights. He says, I knew I had to make it, I had to land the punch, and it was so funny because I didn't know. We were in the cafeteria lined up to eat, or they were lined up to eat. Well, I was not lined up yet. I was doing something else. And all of a sudden, Dynamite comes on, and he had like 4 teeth missing, and he couldn't understand it because there was no teeth there. And then I find out that it was John Russo that cold-cocked him, and then they sent him home. They sent him both. They sent them both home. They both got fired.
Jacques ended up staying there for quite a while. I'm just imagining just like the noise of many quarters, just or dimes, or whatever, just hitting the floor, and everyone just looking around and wondering why that noise has been made. We've got 5 minutes left, so I'll give you 5 minutes worth of names, and then we'll do some plugs, and then shut the podcast down. Who am I going to ask? Kevin Dunn.
Kevin Dunn?
Yeah. Because you don't even know the name, maybe you should move on. He was the director-producer of WWF TV for a while. Decades.
Yeah, I didn't have too much contact with the office and guys, producers, and, you know, I kept to the guys that would interview me and the guys were immediately there. You know, I do remember seeing him, but, you know, I don't know much about him.
I'll move on. Jerry Briscoe.
I met Jerry Briscoe in 1977. You know, the Briscoe brothers, him and his brother, they were very talented. I don't think Jerry had the charisma that Jack had, but, you know, he was with Vince for many, many years.
Let me see. The Road Warriors and Paul Ellering.
I mean, those guys came out of nowhere and they took wrestling by storm. I mean, but I hear that they were so stiff that they used to beat the crap out of, you know, Vern and Bruiser and, you know, all the old timers. You know, they just would throw you, you know, like a piece of crap, and, you know, they were hurting people.
Were they bad guys originally when they came into the AWA?
I wasn't there, so I don't know that they were bad guys. You know,
I'd say heels. I'm sorry, I don't mean like bad people.
Oh yeah, I think they were heels. Yeah, they were heels, and they got over because they were just beating the crap out of everybody.
Yeah. Okay, I'll give you a few more then. Papa Shango.
Papa Shango was a man of many faces. I wrestled him a few matches. I always say I won my first WrestleMania 1 match, and I won my last one. It was a dark match, but you know, one of the nicest guys that you'll ever meet.
Yeah, and I have over this. I've met him before, and he was a great interview as well. Sergeant Slaughter.
Sergeant Slaughter, great talent. When when I got to New York to Minneapolis, he was on his way to New York, and he told Vern he wanted to work with me, and because when he was in Charlotte, me and Don Cornoodle wrestled against him 2 against 1, and he never forgot. He was very grateful for us, you know, 2 guys who were, you know, not, you know, garbage, go up against and put him over. And he volunteered to put me over all over Minnesota, and he helped me get over in Minnesota, you know, by work, because he was over so good.
Yeah. Good for him. I'd hope to interview him as well one day. I've got 4 more names here. I want to ask about Nails, because you were still with the company at that time.
Yes, Nails was a tough guy. You know, I don't know if he ever was really in prison, but I heard that that some of the boys, and I'm not going to mention any names, but some of the boys were teasing him and getting him all fired up for when he got to TV, because Vince was paying him, you know, way lower than his opponents, no matter who his opponents were, and they had him all pumped up. And when he got to the show, the rumor had it that, you know, Nails is going after Vince, and sure enough, you know, he went right straight to Vince's wherever Vince was at, and I never know how much damage he did, but I heard that, you know, it took quite a few guys to pull him back.
That's what you get for being cheap, then, I suppose. And for the very last name, and then we'll call it a day on the podcast, Bobby Heenan.
Bobby Heenan to me, was one of the greatest talents in the business. Not only could he talk, but he could work. Uh, he used to say stuff about me that probably wouldn't be able to say anymore. Called him the Mexican burrito, Tito Santana. I I saw him in his '57 Chevy with his family, selling tacos in the taco stand. And, you know, he was a guy that insulted you, but the more he insulted you, the more he helped you get over. He was a good man. He was so sad to see what happened to him at the end of his life. I mean, I don't know if you remember seeing his face. There wasn't much of his face left. I mean, only his wife could understand him, but he kept his sense of humor until he left.
Yeah, absolutely, and easily one of the absolute greatest of all time. I think it's a great name to end on. Before I let you go, would you like to hit me some plugs? I see you wearing a Tito Santana T-shirt. I know you've got a book out. Give us some links and places where you can get things to support you.
Well, if you want to go to Facebook and order a T-shirt from me, you can do that. I have some books. You can order the book from me. Also, I'm getting ready to make a new order of books. The timing was not good because right when I was going to start selling the book, we got hit with COVID. Mm-hmm. But a lot of the sales were done virtually, and the book is done well, and I've heard a lot of great response about my book. Don't Call Me Chico, and Jesse the Body Ventura is where that title comes from. Mm-hmm. When I travel, I don't like to bring a lot of T-shirts when I travel because they're very bulky. I just bring 8x10s. Whenever I go anywhere. So a lot of it is done on Facebook through me. They can order whatever they want through me, and I can get it. T-shirts, they can go to Wrestling Tees and order them. And I don't have to deal with that. I just get a small percentage from that.
Okay, so we're talking Pro Wrestling Tees. I know your book's on Amazon, but people can also get stuff directly from you. Do you sign everything when you send it out?
Well, when they get it directly from me, I sign it. When they get it from Amazon, they get it a little cheaper, but without a signature.
Yeah, absolutely.
Then when they come and they bring the book to me, then I there's a fee for me to sign it.
Yeah. Well, there you go then. So if you want a signed book or anything from Tito Santana, Facebook, that's where to go. But thank you very much, Tito, for entertaining us. Thank you for watching. We'll catch you again next week. And there's a part 2, 3, and 4 questions-wise anytime you want to come back on. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me. Arriba!